All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, this afternoon, this morning, wherever you are in the world. It indeed gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you here for the first look at Chennai Photo Biennale Edition 3. Really, thank you for taking the time to join us here on Zoom or across our live streams on social media. Going back in time just a little, our second edition, curated by Pushpamala N, closed doors on the March 24th, 2019, after hosting 51,000 visitors across 30 days, spread over 15 venues. The Senate House, our grandest venue, was fully open to the public for the first time in 40 years, and visitors from across India experienced both Chennai and photography in a new light. In late March of this year, when the pandemic took force and the lockdowns began, the team was getting set to go into hyperdrive, with artists being invited and venues being secured. Then the world turned upside down for all of us. I really must applaud our Board of Trustees, the CPB Foundation team, our 4-member curatorial team, and as well as our organizing partners, the Goethe Institute, for their foresight and fortitude in starting the discussions on postponement within weeks of the first lockdown, and for supporting each other through the gargantuan process of recalibrating all of our plans. We took the difficult decision to postpone edition 3 for many reasons. Primary being that we wanted to build on our vision for an immersive public arts experience in photography. We originally chose December in order to be in sync with the music and dance season of Chennai, as well as other arts festivals in the region. We hope that all of these events will once again come together in December of next year. Of course, the last 9 months, the curatorial team has been hard at work, wading through the sea of uncertainty, discussing with artists and bringing together the curatorial premise that you will see unveiled in a few more minutes. We are looking ahead with great hope and great commitment to our year-round programs, and of course, the main reason for all of you being here today, the third edition of the Chennai Photo Biennale, which will open in December 2021 for 2 months until February 2022. We look forward to returning to public spaces with immersive exhibitions and installations, and we hope that you will all come visit Chennai. I would now like to introduce my fellow trustee, Tarana Soni, to say a few words.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tarana Soni, and I have the honor of being a trustee on the board of the Chennai Photo Biennale. I call it an honor, particularly because I see the potential of what a photo biennale of this magnitude has the ability to create. A rich, thriving ecosystem for contemporary art in a novel region of the country, the power to bring together communities, and the capacity to become one of the most significant events in South Asia to represent an extraordinary form of art to the global community. Biennales are unique because as independent foundations, they actively promote diversity, freedom, and experimentation while exercising critical thought and providing autonomous perspectives. They are free of commercial thinking, allowing creativity to emerge for the sake of art. Photography seems to be the most relevant medium to contextualize and galvanize this moment in time. In that, the Chennai Photo Biennale is also fortunate to have the voices of 4 incredible and extremely talented individuals who come together in one voice, the curatorial team. My hope, on a personal level, is that not only will we be able to see exemplary photography, but it will also provide a platform to heal together, to build a more positive community, and allow us to hope for the future.
What I'm most excited about is the potential that it holds for the city I live in. And this potential, I need to sort of clarify, doesn't lie alone in making it better known. I mean, there's a significance about this that goes well beyond fame. Because of the way the Biennale has been organized, it has meant many things for the city, many unrelated things. Of course, at one level, it means more tourists and more footfalls and all of that. But it also means, I think, an opportunity to showcase local talent on an international platform, an occasion for residents to rediscover the city's landmarks, various beautiful landmarks that host the city. The prospect of galvanizing and bringing together the city's culturally minded to celebrate both the art and the city at the same time. And most of all, the opportunity to learn, to imbibe, to interact, and also, just as importantly, to challenge our very presuppositions. For me, this is what makes an event like the Biennale the most interesting. At one level, it is about us. At another level, it's also about the world. Thank you.
So I'm often asked, what's the context between philanthropy and art? And according to me, art and philanthropy have always been synonymous since civilization began, because art is dependent upon patronage. Art first appeared in caves 40,000 years ago. The arts define humanity with our ability to understand, imagine, create, and communicate. So I'm a little shocked that the debate yet continues as to whether philanthropists should support art or the needs of society, as if they were both unrelated. So this morning I was having a chat with a very good friend and Prabhu, and asked him what it meant to him. And I had three interesting insights. That Art India has gained traction from private foundations to government initiatives. And he said, instead of concept of investments in art works, it should evolve as investment into art initiatives. So I mean, that's a very important point for art investors like me.
I will bring the evening to its sort of most anticipated moment, the reveal of the theme for the third edition of the Chennai Photo Biennale. So without further ado, if I can ask my colleague Priya to please bring up her screen and present theme reveal film for CPB edition 3. First of all, I want to say congratulations to the curators for that wonderful theme, Maps of Disquiet. We will be talking to the 4-member curatorial team, and Helmut will moderate that discussion.
So we start in the alphabetical order with Arko Datto, who is a commentator on critical issues and uses photography to question what it means to be a photographer in the digital age. Second is Bhooma Padmanabhan. She's a curator, a researcher, and arts program manager. Then there is the French, born in Jerusalem, living in Berlin. That's Boaz. He's an artist, a writer, and a curator. Welcome to the team, Boaz. Last but not least, of course, Kerstin Meincke, also from Germany. She's a curator, a researcher, and lecturer. So we have here a university background, focusing on photography and media arts in transcultural contexts. So this is our wonderful curatorial team. And of course, it's already a, let's say, courageous decision to take a team in a context where maybe we usually have the one person show, the one man or one woman show. And this is, of course, a different approach from the side of the organization as then, of course, from the curatorial team. So my first question, which we could begin maybe with Arko and Bhooma, the two Indian curators, would be, what was your experience with this different curatorial approach to work in a multicultural international team rather than taking all the decisions yourself as an individual?
Thank you, Nagmo.
Who starts?
I was not starting, so I'll start. Yes, I mean, definitely it's different in terms of collaborating with this fabulous group of curators, but at the same time, I think collaborations happen nonetheless for curators. We're always working with artists, working with other institutions, and there's always sort of this back and forth, which is part of the curatorial exercise, which I think we've been able to achieve with a certain degree of, abilities, a certain sort of ease in the team. So I think in terms of a curatorial collaboration, I think, as you know, when we met last year around this time, it was to sort of get to know each other and decide how we'd like to go about curating this. And one of the first things that sort of stood out for all of us, I think they would agree, was the fact that we were all on the same page, more or less, about what we'd like to do and how we'd like to approach practice, the way we handle artists, how we'd like to show in that space, what's important to us. So I think that's been fantastic. And despite being in 4 different parts of the world, we've managed to find a certain rhythm to, how we work, how we sort of communicate our ideas, share our thoughts, and get feedback. So I think it's been a great learning curve, but it's also been very comforting to know that you have a team with you as you sort of, put forth these ideas in a public space like the Biennale.
Thanks, Bhooma. Arko, do you want to comment a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think we discussed it for quite a bit of time, whether we would like to have individual curated approaches or go for a collective voice. And I think it's sort of a resonance with the times that we live in to have a sort of collective voice that comes through these sort of 4 individual disparate beings who are also coming from various disparate cultural spaces, right? So I think it was, and we came to that sort of unanimity through the discussions that we ended up having in a space like Chennai, where we met for the first time. And while we were sort of discovering the city in new ways, thanks to the team, we were going and discovering a lot of the new spaces, potential spaces for exhibitions, and the discussions that we were having of how to engage with the city and how to look at art through the prism of this particular space. It kind of led to very organically this sort of idea of having a collective curatorial voice that would speak for this particular edition of the Biennale.
Thank you, Helmut, for putting this question. I think it's something we can all benefit from if we work in international teams. And for our teamwork, it has been very important, as Arko has already mentioned, that we've had the chance to meet one time, at least 2 times, second time in Germany, personally, so that we were able to engage with the city of Chennai, and that we were also able to develop our curatorial concept from this encounter. We had the chance to anchor our curatorial program in Chennai, and to make the local level a major subject of our work and curatorial conception from the very beginning on. And I don't see that it's a challenging. I mean, of course, it's challenging to work in an international team, because you have to deal with time, different times, and you have to find some regularity to meet. But I think we can all benefit from that, and it's also been very enriching to have discussions on our multiple perspectives, and I think that's the future, and that's how everyone should continue to work. And I'm very lucky to be part of it. Thank you again for the invitation.
Tell us your opinion about it.
I can add, first of all, I mean, I concur, I agree with what everyone said. I think it also kind of dovetails with what Mukund mentioned in the end of his introduction. I mean, of course, there is, to a certain extent, always, by definition, in the format of these type of shows, also a tension between the local and the global. You know? And in that sense, I think having a diverse group of people from disparate contexts, and it doesn't have to be, I don't know, culturally, geographically, we all also have our own just biographical, life-based experience, our own biographies, our own traumas and our own dreams, which give us kind of a unique perspective on the world. So obviously, I think this benefits when one comes to work on a project, which is kind of by definition straddling this tension between something which has to speak to a specific locality, to a specific context, and I think can only benefit from being kind of, as Kerstin said, anchored in Chennai, but at the same time is also about bringing in these perspectives by artists, by art, showing artworks from different places around the world that correspond to some of these tensions, to some of these difficulties, to the questions that kind of preoccupy us or preoccupy people in Chennai. So yeah, it's beneficial. Of course, there's a tension, but in the positive sense, a tension of energy, I think, which we've enjoyed kind of in exchange. And maybe one word which we can expand on later. Of course, the pandemic has made this all the more evident that this is kind of a global shared experience, which is nonetheless very different, and kind of there's a timeline to how it spreads, etc. We can discuss this maybe later, but I think this has again been kind of a reason why this has been all the more important to have a team.
We should briefly speak about art and the pandemic, COVID-19, which has so much impact on everything in our lives, and especially what is very dear to us, on the art. So can you briefly, this time maybe beginning the other way around with Boaz and Kerstin, and then going back to the two Indian curators, speak very briefly about 3 points. One is the impact that you see of COVID-19 on art in general, then on the artist with whom you have collaborated and whom you try to invite, and finally what it has meant for you in this curation process.
Point asked about the impact of art production, and let's also refer to the reception of art. I think there's what we can observe is there's of course a shift to the digital format, but there's also a shift to the public space, which I really appreciate. because it also on the one hand because it becomes more democratic in a way on a local level, because people can now engage with artworks who have never before maybe had the chance to engage with them. And I think this is a recent observation here in Germany in particular, but I think it must happen everywhere, I suppose, which I really like about the situation.
I think one thing, I agree with what Kerstin says about this kind of the maybe increased value that people see now in art in public space. Also now that public space has become so compromised. I mean, just the idea of leaving my room is tantalizing. But I think also one thing that we've discussed amongst our group during the past months, or one text that has really stuck with me over the past months was a text that Arundhati Roy wrote. I think this was already in March, so quite early and during the pandemic, where she described kind of the pandemic as a catalyst. I mean, a catalyst, or basically a vehicle which exacerbates existing difficulties, existing tensions, existing problems. Basically, the kind of the crisis we have been witnessing unfolding is the result of a very long process of healthcare systems that have been hollowed out, or tensions with urban and rural populations. We see now in the protest, the farming protest. I mean, I think a lot of the tensions which are now kind of surfacing have been there. So it was interesting for us in that sense to think about the pandemic not as something which kind of reaffirmed a lot of the questions which we were already discussing in December, which we wanted to address during the Biennale, the kind of the urgencies which we saw could be at the heart of next year's edition. And for us as an experience, of course, it's difficult to do this not being there. I mean, I think it's been quite a sacrifice, maybe a sacrifice with privilege, sacrifice. We're lucky to have a job and to be able to continue working on this project, but it was also a sacrifice not to be able to visit Chennai again as we were supposed to several times during this year, to work together. And I think that's the same for a lot of artists. People had to change the way they work, and really also altered, I think, kind of created a whole body of work, which focuses, has a different emphasis maybe. But yeah, so for me, this has been kind of the two poles, or the binary, which, on the one hand, it's really reaffirmed a lot of things we've thought about and sought to make a subject of and to address in the Biennale. On the other hand, it's also really changed how we technically work and think about how this show might look like in a year from now, how it addresses public space, how artists address public space, etc.
Arko or Bhooma?
Yeah, I think I can go. Just to take off from where what Boaz was saying, I think when we were configuring, and I mean we're still in the process of refining the curation and going on with it while we have this pandemic, and we're all sort of moving parallelly along across time and space. But I think our curation was already looking at this, the world that was very fraught already. So we shouldn't be pretending that the pandemic is really, it's been a very important thing, but an event. But it's, as far as the curation is concerned, it's not been it's not a paradigm shift. I would really think of it as an exacerbation in terms of degrees at what we were already looking at. So we were looking at the ideas of the environment, how it's collapsing all around us, how borders are restricting the possibilities for people, how especially in a place like India, we are in very fraught political landscape. So, like we were in these zones that have become very intense already. So, which became more intense with the pandemic, but we were always and already looking at these. So our sort of challenge is to sort of kind of incorporate this as we go along and to see, well, we just came out with the first list, but we will be adding more to that. And, so it's kind of a real-time development in a sense, not what we were really planning before, but we kind of have been sort of pushed headlong into this pandemic as far as like curation is concerned. So what's more interesting for me is the idea of like in photography and video, for example, like in image making, what's very interesting is, at least in India, like you're always going out into these chaotic spaces in a sense. You're very close to people in real life, but also for image production, So, and the kind of the pandemic and these ideas of social distancing are very anathema to the way of a majority of image production practices. So I think that's very interesting, and I feel that the pandemic puts, as the French would say, mise en question. So it puts in question this entire idea of how image making would go forward in the near future, and what that would hold for image making practices, but also for us as in the curatorial approach. So these are things that we would be looking for. And also, I mean, the idea of like looking at work from a pre-pandemic age to hopefully where we would be in a post-pandemic age, while we are kind of in that flux zone right now. So, it's all these sort of overlapping incidents and events that we are sort of navigating through.
I mean, I'd like to take it up from that note, because it is, in that sense, the idea of, the portal that kept coming up when we spoke about the pandemic has sort of been this way for us to sort of understand this contemporary movement, and it's sort of, movement backward and forward in time. And I think that's sort of what could have been and has been a part of an artist's practice. A practitioner's practice now has become a sort of a lens through which everyone's sort of experiencing the world. And I thought that was quite important for us, because these, like Boaz and Arko already said, these are not questions that haven't been asked before. Some of the artists that we actually started out our list with were dealing with these questions for years now. Questions of care, questions of solidarity, questions of how our relationship with the environments we're living in. And this is sort of posited in a way which it's no longer sort of restricted to the domain of the visual arts, or, to a certain culture of viewing alone. It's sort of become an experience that we're all able to partake in. And I think it's sort of, to answer your question about, how it sort of affected the curatorial process. I mean, you've been with us every step of the way. It's been the curatorial, since last November, everything has been in flux since we started writing, putting our ideas down, writing the curatorial note, and that flux still continues. So, it's always been this thing of, okay, we don't want it to be too much of a reaction to, the news, but at the same time, how do we sort of speak about what's happening around us? And I think this decision is not just a curatorial decision, it's also a decision that an institution like Goethe or a CPB has had to take. And I think that's also sort of framed the curatorial in very interesting ways. So we're constantly having to sort of think about artists, our collaborators, institutions, colleges and other kind of educational institutions who we had big plans of working with, like where do all these sort of otherwise, model ways of curating, like where do all these structures go? That sort of has gotten scrambled, and we not only having to rethink the curatorial in terms of concept, but also in terms of the structure of how a biennale would work. What kind of public are we going to be looking forward to next year? So it has, it's definitely defined our way of thinking in many ways. But I think it's more of an acute, making us more acutely aware of these questions rather than making, flipping the question around. So
I think we should definitely go on to the topic, to the theme of the third edition. Why maps of disquiet and not photos of disquiet? Could you speak about your cartographic imagination versus photography and how you envision the Biennale will map on to the map of Chennai city itself? This is, of course, one part of the question, but I find it very interesting, and I'll wait for your hilarious answers to this.
I think it was funny with the curatorial note, with this title we came up with. It was kind of something which, despite having only 10 days in Chennai together, we quite quickly, surprisingly quickly, crystallized by the end of the visit, this idea of the map as some type of organizing metaphor. And I think we see it both as a title and also as almost a logic through which we curate, or how our practice could be somehow structured as a sort of mapping. So that's already maybe part of the answer, is that we are thinking of this curatorial concept, this way of addressing the city and the relation between this specific city and a host of global issues as a sort of mapping from below. I think the second part of the answer is more kind of anecdotal and historical, and that relates to Chennai being the site of the first trigonometrical survey by the first colonial attempt to map the Indian subcontinent. And this we thought was in itself kind of interesting, because that campaign, that mapping campaign, was part of a massive colonial representational attempt. It was not only mapping, but quite quickly, it started in 1808, and quite quickly later, it became also a massive photographical campaign to depict, this part of the colonies. And of course, that was, I think, several writers who pointed out the relation between kind of the colonial mapping and knowledge production, and also photography, and this as kind of part of a system which empire or was part of the kind of toolbox of imperial powers. So for us, kind of tackling that and looking at how activists use mapping strategies from below, at how we could maybe address some issues of contested urban space through artworks, but also through our curatorial work, was something we were keen, I think, to do and to think through. Arko.
I could add a bit. I think the map is essentially a sort of where we are going with the Biennale is kind of looking at the idea of the image, and that includes or encompasses the idea of photography, film, but not only. And so we would like to make interjections on where image making practices and what the image means in today's world. And we believe that the cartography is kind of this broad encompassing thematic within which we can explore these questions. Of course, cartography has become an important thing. It's ubiquitous, like we are always using Google Maps, and we are in these sort of cartographic, we live in various modes of cartographic existence right now. So the cartography became the sort of placeholder, let's say, for our existence in today's world. And of course, going back to that great time we spent in Chennai discussing artists and what our curatorial directions could be, I think we were drawn to a lot of the artists. We ended up discussing a lot of the artists who kind of place cartographic approaches at the very center of their art. So it kind of very organically became something that we could explore our curation through. I would add something to that, is the fact that some things like climate change, or in today's world, the pandemic, these are incidents or occurrences that, for example, that the British philosopher Timothy Morton, he has called them as hyper objects. And These are things that take place at a planetary scale, which can be only viewed from a macro perspective. And I think cartographic practices or cartographic approaches can help us map the planetary through the collective curation that we are trying to envision. So that's, I
think the idea of working with maps with cartography with this sort of very veiled idea of what is clear, of the line, of the, the outline, the margin, the border was something that came up often last November. It was very much a part of everyday discussion to think about who belongs inside and who belongs out. There were huge protests going on in India at that time, and that definitely was a starting point for us to start thinking about. These were questions that needed to be urgently addressed, and it came from that space of there being no definite answer to these questions. And the map is this sort of overarching master plan that we imagine as being is actually a falsified idea that sort of we've all sort of bought. And how do we sort of think about that a little further? We were, of course, also constantly thinking about our own locations, what it means to sort of work with a team which is from across the globe. What are the sort of realities of talking about concerns which are both local and sort of global. So these are things I think the map sort of was able to both sort of condense these ideas and sort of offer, it's almost like a, like this idea of clarity which isn't there. So there's, we're always playing around these sort of blurring of the lines when we're talking about maps. I think disquiet sort of also defines, it's not just the maps part of the, the title, which is important, but disquiet is also something which sort of heavily defined our idea of, of what we meant by mapping or, cartographic structures that we'd like to address. And like I think Boaz said, it is something that artists have sort of been precedents in doing, using this kind of data to counter certain notions of, of our world. And we thought it was a great way to sort of start thinking about our process as well.
I was also thinking what we've discussed in Chennai when we met ecological activists in Chennai, that it became really important to realize the different meanings maps can have and the different political levels that are transported by them. And I think this was really important for our concept as well, that they are all at the same time political systems, let's say, but also aesthetic imaginaries. So there are always these both levels, these two levels intertwined in the topic of the map, and that's something we also found very interesting and a point of departure for artists to engage with.
In an increasingly political polarized world, how important is it for art to take sides? And which side should that be, in our curator's opinion? That's an interesting question, I feel. Do you feel like taking sides?
Of course, it's an interesting question, one that at least I find myself asking myself regularly. For me, maybe there are two ways to answer it. One is that it's not necessarily about, I wouldn't necessarily see it as taking sides, because I think often in a politically polarized world, part of the issue is also seeing nuance and finding nuance, and in that sense, kind of diffusing or seeing it as a dialectic rather than as a binary opposition. Diffusing this type of binary choice is already something, kind of a starting point. Of course, there are times where one feels like one should take a side and on certain issues. But for me, that's more of a question as a person rather than also, again, as art. I mean, I think art should complicate things. And so it's less about taking sides and more about maybe creating storms or, creating more problems. But as artists, as curators, of course, occasionally you do take a firm stance, and I think that's also important. But I'm a bit weary always about this kind of the clean binary opposition, and I think a lot of it is more about kind of finding a more complicated and nuanced perspective on questions which we maybe at first think we know the answers to.
I think I'll just add very quickly to that. I think what's important is for art to not really force you to see things in a particular way, but to propose new ways of seeing and to unhinge your existing ways of seeing and to open your eyes to new questions and new modes of looking at the world. And I think that's where we would like to take this curation, basically, rather than taking sides in direct ways.
Okay, thanks to
we can also redirect the question public to the audience. What do you expect us to take a side, or how do you read it?
I suppose this is more of a rhetorical question now.
I would
you
really
want
be
to start a
interested.
discussion? Thank you once more to Arko, Boaz, Bhooma, and Kerstin. I think your wonderful team will have a wonderful one-year postponed Biennale from December 21 for 2 months until February 22 then. So Varun, the question of Bruno, which I a little bit ironically give back to you, is he wants to know what new amazing places of Chennai have you in mind for the 3rd edition?
So what are the wonderful ideas? Well, the venues, there are plenty that we look at, and we actually look regularly at spaces. And I encourage all of you listening, if you have a space that we should look at, please let us know. But we are looking to go back to the venues we've used in the past. So particularly Senate House is a really wonderful building that we hope to have access to again. And there are 1 or 2 more spaces that we are in talks with the Corporation of Chennai. I won't say any names because one doesn't want to jinx these, but there are a couple of beautiful heritage spaces that we hope will open up. And the Biennale will once again be able to bring open a new venue that's not been seen by the city for an experience that they've never had before. And that's all I'm going to be able to say with certainty. With that, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's been a pleasure having you, and look forward to seeing all of you in Chennai.